Hi everyone, today's lesson 2. We are simplifying radicals today. And radicals is a fancy word of saying square roots. So we're simplifying square roots, which might seem a little out of place with what we've been talking about the last couple of lessons. But trust me, it's going to make sense tomorrow because we're going to be adding in basically lesson 1 what we did yesterday with today's lesson, and you'll see why it makes sense. So let's get started with our notes.
Okay, so I'm on the week of 511 folder. We are doing lesson 2 today. That's the Tuesday folder. Remember, access the notes through the assignment in this folder right here. Go to today's plan to see obviously what today's plan is, but there's not going to be a link in there for the notes. Now, it's going to be extremely important for you to use this reference sheet today, How to Simplify Radicals reference sheet. If you click on this, it will take you to the Schoology PDF, but there is also a link in your lesson 2 notes for that PDF. So I'm going to access it that way. So once you click on your notes, and as you can see, I already have my calculator up and ready to go for today. It will be helpful for you. So right on the first line, it says click here to pull up the How to Simplify Radicals reference sheet or access it through Schoology. My Chromebook is taking forever, so this is gonna take forever as well. Okay, so when we look at radicals, it's kind of like simplifying fractions. So if we have a fraction like 5/10, we can simplify that to 1/2. You can do the same thing with radicals. So to figure out how to simplify radicals, your first step is to find the largest perfect square factor of the number under the radical. So for this example on the reference sheet, we have radical 80. And I'm going to be using the word radical instead of square root just because it's so much easier to say, but they mean the same thing. So over on the right, I found out my factors of 80. Now, if you struggle with factors, I showed you this trick when we learned how to factor in the first place. But you go to y equals in your calculator, clear out anything if something's in there, and you type in the number you're trying to find factors for, which is 80, and you divide that by x. And then we go to second graph, and all of the pretty whole numbers are our factors. Now, I don't look at the negatives right now because we're not worrying about negatives. So just look at the positive factors. So we have 1 and 80. You can see that on my calculator, 2 and 40, 4 and 20, 5 and 16, 8 and 10, 10 and 8. So as soon as it starts to repeat, like I said, 8 and 10 and then 10 and 8, you've already looked through all your factors. So I listed out my factors on the reference sheet and I circled all the perfect squares. Remember, perfect squares are numbers where you take the square root, comes out a nice whole number. So there's 1, 4, and 16. So you have to identify the largest perfect square, which is 16 in this case. So your second step is to break down your original radical into the product of the factors you chose. The factors must be under radicals. Write the perfect square first. So I know 16 and 5 are my factors, writing that perfect square first. Now we simplify what we can. We can simplify the square root of 16. That is a perfect square. And that gives us 4 right here. Now, square root of 5, you can double check it in your calculator, but if it's an irrational number, you keep the square root of 5 there. So we write radical 5. So my simplified version is 4 radical 5. So 4 radical 5 is equivalent to radical 80. It's just simplified. Just like 5/10 is the equivalent to 1/2, it's just simplified. Now, the second part of this reference sheet is referring to if we have a number in front of the radical, which sometimes we can. You do the same idea here. So like, I'm going to ignore this 3 out in front first. We're going to just do the same steps that we did in the previous example. It says find the largest perfect square factor of the number under the radical, which we can do. And we got to find factors of 45. Again, you can use your calculator if you need to, but these are our factors lined out on the right. The largest perfect square is 9. So we break down your original radical into a product of the factors you chose. The factors must be under the radicals. Write the perfect square first. So we have 9 and 5. We can simplify the square root of 9 to 3. So now I'm down here. We can simplify the square root of 9 to 3. We cannot simplify the square root of 5. So we have 3 radical 5 as my simplified radical, but I've got that 3 out in front. Do you see how the 3 is smushed up next to the radical? That means we're multiplying. So then we just multiply the outside number that came of simplifying with the original outside number. So 3 times 3 gives us 9 radical 5. And that's how we simplify radicals. So now if we go back to our notes, it might be helpful if you want to have this open in a separate page. Okay, my Chromebook, I'm working off my Chromebook, so I don't have a lot of space. Or you can, there's like a condensed version on the physical packet, so you can look at that as well. But going back to our notes for today, so I'm just going to jump to the bolded here. It says, this lesson may seem out of place for you, but I promise it will make sense during our next lesson, lesson 3. So you're going to see the connection tomorrow. So just like, as I mentioned before, just like we can simplify fractions, 5/10 equals 1/2, we can simplify radicals, which is a fancy way of saying square roots. Before we can do this, you must know your perfect squares. Okay, perfect squares, again, are numbers that can be broken down into a number times itself. Okay, so the easiest way to do it is I just go starting at 1. 1 times 1 gives me 1. That's a perfect square. 2 times 2 gives me 4. 3 times 3, so on and so forth. Pause the video, fill in the rest of the perfect squares. Obviously, we can keep going, but I just listed up until 15 squared, which is 225. So those are about the ones you should have memorized. 14 is not a common one to have memorized, but if you don't have them memorized, it's not the end of the world. You just go to your calculator and double check it. Okay, so let's practice this simplifying. So it says, read through the reference sheet carefully before trying to simplify the radicals below. We already read through the reference sheet, so if you need to refer back to it, do that. So our first step is always to find the largest perfect square factor of the number under the radical. So if you need to write out your factors first, go ahead and do that. So let's go to y equals, just in case you don't know your factors, of 75. Second graph, looking at all those pretty numbers. It looks like we have 1 and 75. Hopefully you can figure that one out. We've got 3 and 25. 5 and 15. And it looks like that might be it. You can scroll down a little bit. Maybe we can go check to see if, yep, we got 15 and 5 again right there. So that means they're repeating. So we're good to go. And my calculator's having a mind of its own right now. So, oh my goodness, stop. Okay. So you could also stop once you find it. Like maybe some of you realize that 3 and 25 are going to be our magical numbers here. Now 1 is a perfect square, but that's a factor of every number. So we're not going to ever simplify with 1, because if you can simplify with 1, that means it's already in its simplified version. So when we simplify this, we're going to have to do an equation. So we're going to have to insert equation. The radical or square root symbol is right here. So we've got 3 and 25. So we have to write our perfect square first. And I could write multiplication in between. I'm not going to. So radical 25 times radical 3. And then we can simplify the radical 25. Square root of 25 is just 5. Radical 3. And that's our simplified radical. So radical 75 is equivalent to 5 radical 3. And that's it. That's our answer right there. It's the whole thing, not just the radical 3. It's 5 radical 3 is our answer. Okay. Now some of these do not need to be simplified. Like you should always check to see if it's a perfect square first. So like number 2, square root of 16, that's 4. That's it. Number 3, the next couple are just like this. Number 3, square root of 36 is 6. Number 4, square root of 64 is 8. Number 5, square root of 80, you can check it in your calculator, but you're going to see it's an irrational number. Now I'm just realizing right now that this is a copycat of the one that is on the reference sheet, but let's look at it as if it's a new problem. So our first step is to list our factors. So going to y equals, finding your factors of 80, and you want to look for a perfect square that's going to go into 80. Okay, just like, again, referring back to here, you can kind of cheat. We've got 5 and 16. So we're going to list out we know 5 and 16 are going to be the magical factors. We always write our perfect square first. So square root of 16. And then we've got the square root of 5. We can simplify the square root of 16 to 4. And then we just keep the radical 5. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the next one. We got the square root of 30. So you can check it in your calculator, see if it's a perfect square, but it is not. So let's go to y equals. I'm just going to show you this one in the calculator for a reason. So we got 30 over x, second graph. Oh boy, going to have to scroll a little bit here as well. I don't want my calculator to freak out. Okay, so we have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, 6 and 5. So they repeated, so we went through all of them. Now look at them, try to find the largest perfect square. You'll notice the largest perfect square is 1, and that's it. Now, if I were to simplify it, it would be the square root of 1 times the square root of 30. Square root of 1 is 1. It would be 1 radical 30. But guess what? That's the same thing as radical 30. So this one can't be simplified. So this one we would just keep at radical 30. Okay, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to do 7 through 10 on your own right now. All right, check your work with my work. Bringing your attention to number 9, the square root or radical 32. Just be careful if you use the 4 and 8 as your factors. Yes, that simplifies. However, you can keep simplifying. That's why I always say to find the largest perfect square, because then it will only have one step. Okay, so the largest perfect square is 16. Okay, that's all I got for you for today for this lesson. If you have questions, please let me know. Make sure you self-assess for today's lesson as well.